For staff and sergeants and senators. Majority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move a call of the Senate.
Call has been made and sustained. Will the sergeants please close the doors, allow no senators to leave, and return those who are absent from the chambers? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Senators Aguilar, Baumgardner, Cook, Quorum, Court, Crowder, Donovan, Binberg, Fields, Garcia, Gardner, Guzman, Hill, Holbert, John, Jones, Kagan, Kafalis, Kerr, Lambert, Lumberg, Marble, Martinez-Huminick, Merrifield, Moreno, Neville, Priola, Scott, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Tate, Todd, Williams, Zinzinger, Sonnenberg, Guzman, Quorum, Aguilar, Marble, Hill, Martinez-Huminick, Neville, Priola. Lumberg.
Mr. Majority Leader,
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to raise the call of the Senate.
the motion is to raise call. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the call is raised. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members like you, I care deeply about the Senate's integrity and its proceedings. As we are here to do the work of the great people of the state of Colorado and to ensure that we uphold the transparent process. I know today has been a busy day, and it now appears we're going to have a late night. We have a long day ahead of us. However, we share a responsibility to ensure that the rules of proceedings and the customs important to this institution are upheld. And today in committee, I witnessed something I've never seen before. A member of the majority party was marked absent during roll call, yet on 3 separate bills, we voted that member was then marked as excused. After the first vote, I raised a parliamentary inquiry or point of information to the chair and asked that the question, is this a new standard? Mr. President, how is it that a member can be physically absent but noted and recorded as an excused vote? Our practice is that if a member is excused, it is recorded as an excused vote. However, if a member is absent, then their vote is recorded in that manner. I raised this question before the body so that we might reflect on how we can listen to each other, learn from one another, and improve on the way that we work on behalf of the citizens of the state of Colorado.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for a moment of personal privilege to address that concern.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. From the well here, I had told folks that we would have committee hearing and that we wanted to start right away. I had said that you would be absent if we weren't there when the start. I failed when the senator from Grand Junction told me that he had a lunch meeting he was the speaker at. To remember that when we had the roll call taken. We cast the votes. It wasn't fair to have him listed as absent if he was actually doing his legislative duties speaking at a luncheon, so I indeed marked him excused on all 3 bills. With that said, I also am concerned about the environment we're working in down here and the deterioration between our relationships on both sides of the aisle. And I want those fixed. I want us to work together to try and solve these problems that we have, that the people have sent us down here to do. Now, if we want to talk about procedure and who was absent and who was excused, that's fine. I should have excused him to begin with if I would have not been trying to pay attention to 3 conversations when we were on the floor. I want to work with everybody in this chamber so that we can solve some of these issues that need solved. It doesn't matter what the issue is. We have continually seen the decorum fall in the chamber, and that does nobody any good, and it harms us. And yes, I'm just as much a part of that as I am, as anybody. With that said, members, I look forward to trying to solve these problems, to move forward, and address the issues that the people of Colorado want us to address. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Carpenter, committee reports.
March 28, 2018, Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Energy. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following House Bill 1069, be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations. March 28, 2018, Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Energy. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following House Bill 1147, be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations. March 28, 2018, Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Energy. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following Senate Bill 218, be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations. March 28, 2018, Committee on Business, Labor, and Technology. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following Senate Bill 193, be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations. March 28, 2018, Committee on Business, Labor, and Technology. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following Senate Bill 210, be referred favorably to the Committee on Finance. March 28, 2018, Committee on Judiciary. After consideration of the mayor's committee reports following Senate Bill 199, be amended as follows. As amended, be referred to the Committee on Finance with a favorable recommendation.
Signing of bills.
The President has signed Senate Bill 160.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate re-resolve into the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of continuing our general order second reading of bills.
The motion is for the Senate to re-resolve into the Committee of the Whole for consideration of the general order second reading of bills calendar. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will re-resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for consideration of the general order second reading of bills calendar. Senator Hill will take the chair.
The committee will come to order, and the coat rule is relaxed. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read the title to Senate Bill 197?
Senate Bill 197 by Senators Sonnenberg and Crowder and Representative Lewis concerning an exception to the requirement that motor vehicle clear a port of entry for vehicles transporting agricultural commodities.
Senator Crowder.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I remove Senate Bill 197, ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 197? Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for noticing that I was standing there with my hand up. First of all, I do want to say that I have heard from a colleague who lives in the rural areas who wrote to me specifically and asked me to work across the aisle and help support this bill because as a agricultural member, he was experiencing adverse effects from the issue this bill is trying to address. And so I am coming up to say I will be supporting the bill today after discussing this with that gentleman. But I was really just coming up to say that we all know what the elephant is in the room. It's that resolution introduced February 13th.
We'll be in a senatorial 5.
And as soon as that resolution is desk and discussed,
The committee will come back to order. Colleagues, we are on Senate Bill 197. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 197 that actually has to do with Senate Bill 197? Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I heard this bill in committee, and I was convinced by the testimony, especially from the ranchers and the farmers that were there, to vote yes. We did hear some strong arguments from State Patrol, and I believe that they do have some valid concerns. However, this past summer, I had the opportunity to tour a farm, a wheat farm, and talk to the rancher there. I had a wonderful tour. He showed me all the very, very, very expensive equipment that he has. He showed me all of the trucks that he has that takes that wheat product to other locations. And the one thing that he asked me to do was to address this issue as it relates to going into these weight stations. And what he has to do oftentimes is he has to go it's not a straight path. And he is using more miles, and he does make several trips. And when I think about the labor and the costs involved of moving the product, I'm convinced that this is the right thing to do. The bill sponsor did mention in reference to, why do we even have permits? You know, why are we even charging folks this fee? And I believe it is warranted, because these trucks, a variety of different trucks, not just farm trucks, but a lot of different trucks are on our roads. And they do deserve, they do need to be charged to using our roads. And that's what those fees go to. So members, I do urge a yes vote on Senate Bill 197.
Senator Todd.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry, I was trying to scramble and find my message, and I can't find it. But one of the questions that I wanted to check on is about the federal funding. That my understanding is that there is potential that Colorado could lose federal funding if the inspections are not done. And I don't know if maybe the sponsor could speak to that. And again, just for clarification, I'm sorry, I was going to ask you before we came back in, and I didn't get that done. Thank you.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a good question. There is a provision that says that if there is a change in the weights and limits aspect of state law, that there could be potential grant loss. My argument to that is there is no change in the weights and limits. We're doing everything now the same way we have done in the past. It's just that essentially we're not always following the law by going that extra 5 miles when we're hauling that manure from the feedlot. It doesn't change things. We're not changing the weights. We're not changing the lengths. We're not changing the inspections. They can still set up, and they will still set up with their portable scales, which is required. This doesn't change that. I don't think you'll see any more or less prosecution. I don't think you'll see any more or less violations. I think what you will see is the status quo, and that's why I don't believe there's a damage to our potential grant process from U.S. Department of Transportation.
Colleagues, the motion, Senator Todd.
Thank you. And just one more final question. And again, this is just for my clarification about the permit. And is it a cumbersome process? Is it expensive? What does that look like? I mean, I know you showed me the map, and I get that, but just for clarification. Thank you.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And indeed, it is free. But it's not online. Nobody knows about it, which makes you ask the question, So why do we have the permit? What's the purpose of the permit? The permit is a free permit that you mail in, and you don't have to stop, but the officer doesn't know that. There's no outside decal, there's no nothing that says that you have this permit, so we need to leave you alone. You still get stopped. You still go through the portables. You still have all those aspects, what we currently have now. So I would argue that the permit actually, although it's a nice gesture, nobody uses it, nobody knows about it, and it doesn't serve a purpose. I think it's actually wasted time for most of us.
Colleagues, the motion is the adoption of Senate Bill 197. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 197 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, on to 1246. Please read the title, sir.
House Bill 1246 by Representative Danielson and Senator Quorum concerning updates to the Colorado Nursery Act and in connection therewith modernizing the act and protecting agriculture from pests, diseases, and noxious weeds.
Senator Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move House Bill 1246. Ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1246? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1246. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1246 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read the title to House Bill 1134?
House Bill 1134 by Representatives Pedersen, Wilson, and Senators Merrifield, Martinez, Humana concerning eligibility of kindergarten students funded through early childhood at-risk enhancement positions.
Senator Martinez Humanic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We move House Bill 181134 for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1134? Colleagues, my request as the chair is that we at least give a little bit more explanation of what we're doing on the bills. For members on both sides, I appreciate it. Just honor the process. Give at least a sentence or two on what we're doing here with the bill.
I'm going to go.
Senator Merrifield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be as brief as possible. You know, our CPP program has been really successful. The kids who have the opportunity to take CPP do much better than those in their same level of at-risk assessment. If you're an at-risk child and you get to be in a CPP spot, you succeed much more likely at the high school level. You do much better in your math and your reading, et cetera. So we liked it. The legislature liked it so much that we chose to expand it in 23 and 2014, but with a mechanism that we called eCare, Early Childhood At-Risk Enhancement Program. The problem was it's not clear that it's not clear if we were targeting children who are facing challenges that put them at risk for not being school ready. So, long story short, this bill makes it definite that if a child is going to be using eCare funds for kindergarten slot, they must meet certain criteria that we mandated for them to be receiving eCare funds for their CPP slot. That's all it does. Would ask for your approval.
Thank you, Senators, for giving a little more explanation. I appreciate that. For the bills that we haven't heard, colleagues, just my request that we give a few sentences on what the bill is doing just as we go through this process. The motion, colleagues, is the adoption of House Bill 1134. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1134 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 123.
Senate Bill 123 by Senator Sonnenberg and Representative Liston concerning asbestos trust claim transparency.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding they may want to delay this bill a little bit until the minority leader gets back in, but I think they have their argument. With that said, then I move Senate Bill 123 and ask for a yes vote as we have discussed this thoroughly.
Senator Kagan.
we were on discussion of the bill when this was laid over till this afternoon. And I'd just like to point out to the members who may have voted yes on the bill the last time it was on second reading, in case there is any misunderstanding, under current law, without this bill, it is the right of the defendant to depose the plaintiff in a litigation where there are more than one potential liable parties, and to depose that plaintiff under oath with a court reporter present, with penalties for failure to disclose about all the other potential parties who may have caused the damage. That is current law. And then when trial commences, if it does, it is open to the defendant to make sure that the jury is instructed to assess the percentage of the liability that each defendant and each absent party may be liable for. And then if the verdict form is returned with this defendant is only liable for 60 or 70% of the damages, under Colorado law, that defendant cannot be made to compensate for any but their own percentage of damages. The only thing that would change if this bill were to pass is that in that deposition of that plaintiff, that defendant would be able to say, okay, so you did work for Jones Manville for 6 months in 1983. Have you sought recovery from them through their bankruptcy trust? And then if the plaintiff says, no, we have not chosen to proceed against them, the defendant can say, well, why not? And the plaintiff can reply under oath, well, I don't care to discuss with you why not. And they can then, the defendant can say, right, well, we're going to seek the court to order you to claim from the trust and to hold this proceeding up until you have made that claim. That is what this allows defendants to do. It is not necessary. It is unfair. It tilts the scales toward the plaintiff, towards the defendant that is in the litigation, and it is a completely unnecessary and unfair piece of change to the way we do our litigation in Colorado. And that's why I urge a no vote on Senate Bill 123.
Senator Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'll be brief on this. I would just ask for a no vote on Senate Bill 123 and just remind you about the amendment that we had through collaboration to be able to put in. The amendment that we agreed to talked about a natural person who may be facing a premature death from exposure to asbestos that occurred while he or she was a member of the Armed Forces of the United States. And we wanted that exemption. We wanted to create that clarity for veterans and that protection. So I ask as you look at this, you'd be a no vote.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In closing, members, we have talked about this and talked about this and talked about this. Ask for a yes vote.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, members, I have two rise and ask for a no vote. And I'd refer you to the bill, page 5, lines 10 and 11, where we put all these extra requirements on the plaintiff, and they need to do them in time periods that intentionally delay the onset of this trial. Page 5, lines 10 and 11, sworn statements shall be provided no later than 120 days prior to the date set for trial for the asbestos. And then page 5, lines 22, not later than 120 days before trial. More papers are required. On page 7, lines 2 through 6, a court shall stay in asbestos action if the court finds that the plaintiff had failed to make the disclosures required under this section within 120 days prior to the trial date. And sometimes, as Senator Kagan mentioned, these failures are not intentional. They just did not realize that there was something else that perhaps should have happened. And again, on page 7, lines 15, not less than 90 days before the trial, other claims are required to be reported. And so this just seems like a good way of trying to lead to some people perhaps dropping their claims prior to settlement or trial just because they've become frustrated with the process. Reminds me a little bit of the prior authorization process in medicine, and it's a delay tactic that is used by the payer so they don't have to actually pay the bills. And so I think we do our constituents a great disservice by putting all these requirements on them, and I would also ask for a no vote on Senate Bill 123.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, let's just look at the facts on how they've acted, how this has worked in other states. Ohio, Texas, shortened the time frame, sped out the process. New York Times reports that asbestos litigation is a bonanza for trial lawyers. Most delays are because of the lawyers. It's a simple question. And the minority leader was correct when he said veterans have a much larger stake in this than others. That's why we wanted them back in the bill. You have an option. You can choose to help veterans get their money quicker, or you can choose to support the trial lawyers that are referenced in the New York Times. Ask for your yes vote.
Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 123. Senator Aguilar.
So I'm not asking for a no vote because I support the trial lawyers. In fact, they've never spoken to me about this bill this year. They may have spoken to me about it in the past. I'm asking for a no vote because that's what's best for patients.
Colleagues, all those in favor of adoption of Senate Bill 123, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 123 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, next up we have Senate Bill 192. Please read the title.
Senate Bill 192 by Senator Marble and Representative Buck concerning a requirement that a local government that interferes with oil and gas operations compensate persons damaged by the interference.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 192. There are no committee reports, and I look for a favorable recommendation from all of you with a total aye vote.
There is an amendment on the desk. Okay, thanks, Nancy. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Amendment 2 by Senator Donovan?
Amendment L002 to Senate Bill 192 by Senator Donovan, amendment printable page 2, line 5, after moratorium, insert 1, page 2, after line 20, insert 2.
Senator Donovan. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you,
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, good evening. I ask for your support on Amendment 2 to Senate Bill 192. This amendment is addressing the issue that if a community has made a decision around protecting public health or safety, then that is a decision that community's allowed to make by local control and by the traditions of Colorado. And so it would say that then the rest of, that the Senate bill, that the requirement that a local government compensate people would not be applicable if a community has decided that a prohibition or moratorium that was adopted was put in place because of health or safety. I ask for your aye vote on L002.
Senator Donovan, will you move the amendment, please? Just want to wait till you finished speaking. Okay, Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do move, now that I have convinced you of it, L002.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, colleagues, Senate Bill 192 simply says that if a local government preempts the ability of a property owner to utilize their property for their enjoyment or for their purpose of actually getting to the resources that they own on their property, that city or that entity would have to pay compensation for that. This is a private property right issue. So to the good senator from Vail, I would ask, are you saying with your amendment that it's required that they should pay with the exception of when possibly an entity believes that it's for the public health and safety, then it's okay for them to preempt that private property right without any compensation? I'd ask the good senator from Vail for clarification.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you. In the spirit of dialogue at the mic and answering each other's questions, yes, I think that was a good summary of the amendment. Thank you.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, members, you have to understand the current situation. Right now, local governments can't take private property without just compensation as decided in court. It's called takings law. It's a very old set of law. Gross versus Pitkin is part of that. But the point is that this is already addressed, and this is trying to be much more direct and intimidate, I think, local governments out of protecting their people. Let's not forget that public health and safety and welfare is an important thing. Near my district, there were 2 people killed last year, and there were 14 explosions in all. Last year, 15, 4 deaths. This is a bottom line public health and safety issue, and local governments should be able to say no to it just like they do every other activity. And if we're going to talk about private property, then let's talk about corporate eminent domain called forced pooling. I didn't bring this up, Mr. Chair, others did, so I'm going to address it. That's where an oil company can come in and have one property owner, one mineral owner.
Senator Jones, does this amendment have to do with pooling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was brought up, this is about property rights, and we're going to talk about property rights, so I'm going to talk about property rights. And
You can talk about that on the bill. We're talking about Amendment 2 here.
One of the previous people in the well that you didn't call out on this brought this issue up, sir. They brought up this is people's personal property, and so is it when it's taken from them to be sold to an oil company that they don't want to sell it to. You force people to sell their property. The state does, so somebody else can make profit. So if we're going to talk property, let's talk about property. I'm happy to engage in that. A woman in committee on another bill said she reminded her of China and the totalitarian government that they have there. But to this amendment, don't you think that local governments should be able to do their fundamental protection of public health and safety and welfare, especially after innocent people were blown up last year? And workers were blown up last year? We just got a thing from the pipeline, the flow line regulations about already safe industry will be even safer after these rules. These rules were put in place because of an explosion that killed a dad and an uncle.
Senator Jones, you've spoken on this. I hear it. Let's focus on Amendment 2, please.
Happy to, sir. Let me read it to you. Nothing in this section applies to the prohibition or moratorium that is adopted to protect public health and safety. I would say to you that getting blown up falls under public health and safety. And people think I say this too much, but I don't. Because public health and safety is a fundamental thing that local governments work on, and people are really afraid. They're saying, these people can put this near me, and I could get blown up, and my local government can't do anything about it. This amendment says, yeah, your local government can, just like any other activity. You can't do this with a dynamite plant. You can't do it with a meatpacking plant. You can't do it with a chemical plant. So why can't we do it with this, especially after people are dying from this industry?
Is there any further discussion on Amendment 2? Senator Marble. Senator Aguilar. Senator Marble. Senator Aguilar.
We could speak together if you'd like. We might not say the same thing. I rise in support of this amendment. I do think that one of our fundamental duties here at the legislature is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our public, and I think the local governments are in a better position to determine that than a centralized body. I think they're also in a better position to perhaps put appropriate worth on the values of a life. And sometimes that does mean that perhaps a mineral rights owner does not have access to their mineral. But I would ask, if that mineral rights holder leased their rights to a oil and gas company and somebody is killed, do they then also have liability for that as the independent owner? So I think we need to ensure that our local governments can continue to protect the health and safety of their populations.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a no vote on L002. Bottom line, all the bill is asking for is compensation. If you put a moratorium or a prohibition on for whatever reason, then just pay the property right owner of that mineral their just compensation. That's all we're asking for.
Colleagues, is there any further discussion on Amendment 2? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 2 to Senate Bill 192. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. The noes have it. Amendment 2 is lost. There's another amendment on the desk. We've had an upgrade from Mr. Carpenter. Will the clerk please read Amendment 1 by Senator Fenberg?
Amend printed bill page 2, line 5.
Senator Fenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L001 to Senate Bill 192.
I just moved it. Is there any further discussion on Amendment 1? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 1.
I did.
Senator Fenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. L001 basically states that this does not apply if a moratorium or a ban or a prohibition is placed on by a proactive vote of the residents of that local government.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I ask for a no vote on L001. Bottom line, this is worse amendment than the one previously because it's just people taking away the rights of another without any type of hearing, any type of due process. It has nothing in here to preserve any rights of that property owner. So I'd say it's a little worse than the L002 and ask for a no vote.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Or in other words, the way I would put it is this amendment is not appropriate because it somehow imagines that a local vote of the people can somehow nullify the Fifth Amendment, which is really what the bill is doing, is recognizing the appropriate respect that needs to be given to private property, but somehow a local vote of the people can override that. Seems, if not unconstitutional, at least illogical.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Fifth Amendment because that's where takings law comes from. This is already addressed. This is overkill, and why wouldn't you let people make that decision? And to the point of taking away people's property without a very clear process, that's what you do with forced pooling. The letters are very opaque. You can't read what they mean. They don't tell you you have so many days to respond. I've seen them. My parents got them. They put a check on it and say, hey, if you cash this, you agree. And it's only one person that's needed to condemn hundreds of people along the bore. It is an egregious taking of property and private property that way. So I would ask for a yes vote on this amendment. People should have the say to protect themselves in this way, and takings law already applies. You don't have to have this bill, and if that's the case under the Fifth Amendment, you can go to court and do it on takings law, well-settled law.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gosh, this might be one of the most exciting debates we've had here in the legislature because it really shows some possible fundamental differences in what and how we believe government should work. Now, if you believe that that private property is the ownership of the individual, there is no more local control than the private property, your own property control. So we can talk about other local control, but this amendment basically says a simple democracy can take away your right to your property or your right for compensation of that property. That's interesting. I think that flies completely in the face of our Constitution and what we believe of individual rights. And I think it flies in the face of the proper role of government, which has the ability and the responsibility to protect those individual rights. I'm glad for the argument and the conversation because I think it shows some fundamental differences in this chamber, and I would urge a no vote on the amendment.
Senator Jones.
Well, if you don't think a democracy should do that, I don't think you probably think a representative democracy should, and we shouldn't have forced pooling statutes that make people sell their property. Because that's what we have now, and that's a democracy, apparently, a representative democracy that did that, but somehow direct democracy is not okay, but making people sell their property. Hundreds of people. The Oil and Gas Commission has no idea how many people they condemn this way. Thousands every year. Nobody makes a peep. All they would tell me is 300 to 500 forced pooling orders routinely okayed to take and make people sell their property for somebody else's profit, even if they don't want to. A lot of oil companies don't like forced pooling because they don't want to sell their property. But individuals, they think it's draconian and horrible. So I don't see talking about this being a problem, but the other thing not being a problem. This is a great idea. Vote yes.
Colleagues, just for clarification, we relaxed the coat rule. That includes staff. Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 1 by Senator Finberg. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. Senate Amendment 1 is lost. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 192? Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, remember, this bill is unneeded. We already have well-settled takings law that does this. This, to me, it seems to me a way to intimidate local governments so that they don't protect their people that they're sworn an oath to protect. And I think that's a problem. And I also think it's a problem because it prioritizes one set of property owners over another. So if you want to sell, this helps you. If you don't want to sell your property, if you don't want the government coming in through forced pooling, otherwise known as corporate eminent domain, if you don't want that, you are so out of luck. You get a bad deal. You get 12.5% of the profit after the well pays for itself twice over. And you don't get a whole lot to say about it. That's set up in statute by representative democracy and an unelected board that says that's how it works. If we're worried about private property, let's change forced pooling laws. Let's get rid of corporate eminent domain that makes thousands, likely, people sell their property every year. We don't know how many, because the Oil and Gas Commission doesn't even bother to know. I find it amazing, quite frankly, that we get on one side and talk about private property and then turn around and it's okay for the oil and gas companies to force you to sell. This is how it works. There's a bore up to 2 miles long. You get one property owner, you go into the Oil and Gas Commission, they say, oh, routine deal. Everybody else along that bore who owns property must sell, and if you don't, you will get what they call forced pooled. It's actually a form of eminent domain. You have to sell your property. You may not even like the oil and gas operation that's next door to you. Now they make you sell. And worse yet, they make you become a partner. You're called a working interest partner. And theoretically, if something happens at the well site, you're liable too. This is just, I got to say it, it's un-American to me how this works. This bill is not needed. Let's vote no.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the fiscal note raises kind of two interesting but almost at contradictory points about this bill. It first brings up attention to what could be the responsibility and impact on our local governments if this bill were to go into effect. And it says it could include the paying of the amount of lost royalties. I think that one's the obvious one that we see on this bill. But the fair market value, other costs, whatever those could be, and damages, costs and damages incurred by oil and gas operators would be added on top of whatever the fair market value is that the local government would need to reimburse for, and other royalty holders. It also suggests and predicts that local governments will have increased workload, including legal expenses, and I can't even imagine what a legal expense for battling an oil company or other extraction industry on this would look like. Municipal courts would have to take on the workload of those debates, and we already know how packed and overwhelmed our municipal courts are. And so if we just think about those alone, that seems like quite the burden and significant financial impact on some communities. I would say a financial impact that a lot of small communities couldn't even absorb. But then the final part of this debate on the impact on local governments then says, but this fiscal note assumes that local governments are unlikely to enact any future bans because of the Supreme Court ruling. So then I actually wonder why we need this bill at all. So for those two reasons, I ask for a no vote on 192.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be a no vote on Senate Bill 192. I did get the opportunity to hear this bill in committee, and what struck me is that we did not have anybody from the Gas and Oil Commission there, but we did have residents there and other organizations there. And I think there was maybe, I can't remember who supported the bill, but what was strikingly interesting is that we didn't have anybody from the Oil and Gas Commission there. So they're not asking for this bill. But I know that the communities that I represent, they want to have say. We talk all the time about local control, local control, local control. But yet we're taking away an opportunity for the citizens and local government to be involved. I think that's unfair. I think that's wrong. I think this bill would cause confusion, and I think it would cause conflict because it undermines the ability for local governments to make decisions on their own about development activities regarding oil and gas development. I have oil and gas development that's taking place right now in Watkins. And those communities want to have the opportunity to give input when that local government is considering oil and gas drilling. So members, this bill, I believe, chooses oil and gas as a priority over local government and communities and citizens. So vote no on Senate Bill 192.
Colleagues, the motion is the adoption of Senate Bill 192. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 192 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title of Senate Bill 1254.
House Bill 1254 by Representative Van Winkle and Senator Smallwood concerning the modification of the foreclosure process on property that is encumbered by a deed of trust.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1254. And before we get too far into the bill, I also have an amendment that I'll be moving as well. I didn't know if we should move that now.
Whenever you want, Senator. Senator, if you'll, I'll have him read the amendment, but if you'll just go ahead and hit a quick overview of 1254, then we'll get to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1254, we heard in committee already. It's dealing with public trustees, doing a number of things regarding the public trustees, removing the requirement of foreclosing attorneys using newspapers for publishing foreclosure notices, no longer requiring foreclosing attorneys to provide their own self-addressed envelopes, modifying the deposit fee requirement, clarifying the amount due to the public trustee if the deed holder pays more than what's due, which is what the amendment's going to address, adding certification of purchase, recording fees, removing reference to electronic bidding, and creating the authority for the public trustee to withdraw a foreclosure if a restart notification is never received. There were two amendments also. One made technical corrections. The other one changes the time period of the foreclosed property.
There is an amendment on the desk. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Amendment 5?
Amendment L005.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ask for your aye vote on Amendment 5. Amendment 5 was the result of both the Colorado Bar Association and the proponents of the bill getting together asking for Amendment 5, which provided really new language regarding the overpayment and the what is done with the excess of the amounts of the bid over the amount. So it's a technical amendment that the stakeholders agreed to.
Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 5. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Amendment 5 is adopted. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1254? Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1254. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1254 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, will you? Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we move Senate Bill 185, Senate Bill 052, and Senate Bill 166 to follow House Bill 1098.
Colleagues, the motion is to lay over Senate Bill 185, Senate Bill 52, and Senate Bill 166 to follow House Bill 1098, staying in that order. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. These three bills will be laid over to follow House Bill 1098. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read the title to House Bill 1098?
House Bill 1098 by Representatives Sane and Gray and Senator Marble concerning the expanded ability of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to finance the remediation of oil and gas locations.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 18-1098 and ask for an aye vote. Colleagues, this bill came through the House unanimously. It was pulled off the consent calendar the other day, probably needing a little bit of explanation as to exactly what this bill addresses. And it involves the environmental response account. And this account specifically deals with orphan wells and cleanup of defunct oil and gas companies, and we need to deal seriously with this safety situation, and this bill is needed to codify this practice so funds stay in the environmental response account for future uncertainties. The JBC was totally supportive of this bill, and it is a vital part of the cleanup effort. This bill allows a rollover from year to year from any funds unspent in the environmental response account and not be swept away and used for other things. So I hope that is enough to clarify the intent of this bill and why it has been so successful in passing the House and Senate committees so far.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, members, to understand, this is, is good for what it is. It's a small improvement. I appreciate that. But to really understand what's going on here, you have to understand the funding of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And they basically run on two things: severance tax and the Environmental Response Fund. Now, the Environmental Response Fund is traditionally used to help out with orphan wells that are left behind, that aren't, somebody goes bankrupt, they leave the state, and they clean them up. They plug them and they reclaim them. That's why it's called remediation. It's more than just reclamation. They also use this fund for unexpected accidents and incidents. Now, there are 240 orphan wells across Colorado, 300 needing remediation, and 400 likely orphan wells. It's interesting they don't even know. But they're about $85,000 to plug and reclaim per pop. And these are wells that are left behind by companies that think somebody else should clean up their mess. And I don't think it should be taxpayers. Let me explain. So those 240 wells is about $21 million worth of cleanup. The 400 more is $34 million. In our budget that they're debating in the House, there's $5 million to take care of a portion of this, a small part. But these wells increase during a downturn when oil prices are low. And that's going to happen again, just like the gas you pump in your car goes up and down in price. But it also covers not just orphan wells, and by the way, there are 400 abandoned wells on top of this, and potentially 4,000 more orphan wells. I want you to think about that. 4,000 orphan wells. It'd be about $340 million if that's the case for you and for us to clean up. But this is also used for emergency situations like the Firestone explosion. The best I can tell from the documents to the Joint Budget Committee, the Oil and Gas Commission spent $750,000 investigating that, plus another $366,000. So they spent north of $1 million. And remember, we had 14 explosions last year, 15, and 4 deaths. So there's a real need for this money. So it's nice that we can keep a little more around, but what we really need is more. And this Environmental Response Fund is funded by a mill levy up to 1.7 mills. It was at 7 before. The Oil and Gas Commission was falling behind at the tune of, $2 million a year? They were falling way behind. And it just increased at 0.4 by rule. But it can go up to 1.7 million, and it's worth about $1 million each. Every point of that mill. So with that, I would move L001.
Mr. Carpenter, when you get a copy, will you please read Amendment L001?
Amendment L001.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, members. What this does is it takes the mill up to 1.7. That's what's allowed under law. It would bring in per year 0.6, about $6 million a year. So we could remediate these 240 wells at twice the rate we're contemplating and get to these likely ones and the other ones that are behind it. Plus, we would have money left behind for the next explosion. Because believe me, there will be more explosions. There were 15 last year. 4 deaths, lots of people in the hospital severely burned. These are the operations people seem to think it's okay to put near neighborhoods or in neighborhoods. So I ask for a yes vote on this. This is the least we can do to do what the title of the bill says. Expand the ability of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to finance the remediation of oil and gas locations. It does that a tiny bit now. Doesn't even the fiscal note have a table that says it. But it's good they have that financial flexibility in this bill, but they need more money, folks. Otherwise, you know what's going to happen? and this is what I don't want to have happen for all of you listening. Somebody out there is. Taxpayers and the general fund are going to be asked to do this. It's going to compete with schools and things like that. And boy, you tell somebody that they're going to have to subsidize an oil company, I know what you're going to hear. So we got to keep that from happening by passing this amendment. So I ask for a yes vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment 1? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 1 to House Bill 1098. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. Amendment 1 is lost. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1098? Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1098. All those in favor say aye. Division has been called. It will be in a senatorial 5. The committee will come back to order. Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1098. Division has been called. Will everyone please have a seat? All those in favor of House Bill 1098, please stand. Colleagues, we already voted on Amendment 1. And division was called on adoption of House Bill 1098. We are now on division was called on adoption of House Bill 1098. That's the vote we're on. The chair is not in doubt. House Bill 1098 is adopted. Colleagues, I apologize to those of you that are a little bit slower at counting, as some of you, I understand, were taking off your shoes. Colleagues, we laid over these three bills, so next up is Senate Bill 185 by Senator Smallwood. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read the title to Senate Bill 185?
Senate Bill 185 by Senator Smallwood and Representative Everett concerning the use of deadly force, physical force against a person who has made an illegal entry into a place of business.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 185 as amended.
Colleagues, there is an amendment on the desk Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Amendment 6 by Senator Aguilar?
Amendment L006, number 185 by Senator Aguilar, amend printable.
Senator Aguilar.
I didn't raise my hand yet.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please continue reading Amendment L006?
Amendment L006, number 185 by Senator Aguilar, amend printable page 2, strike line 24 and substitute force, except that such immunity does not apply if the occupant, owner, manager, or employee used deadly force against the other person because of that person's race, color, ancestry, religion, national origin, physical or mental disability, or sexual orientation.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L005, and I ask for...
Senator Aguilar, we're actually on Amendment 6, just to clarify.
Sorry.
It's all good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L006, and I ask for an aye vote. Members, remember, in the bill, the owner, manager, or employee just needs to have a reasonable belief that such other person has committed a crime in the dwelling or place of business. And what this says is if they have that reasonable belief, but it just so happens the person they used deadly force on was in a protected class because of their race, color, ancestry, religion, national origin, physical or mental disability, or sexual orientation, then they do not receive this immunity. Now, they may still be found not guilty, but they don't get automatic immunity, and a case needs to be heard, and the evidence needs to be gone through to ensure that the person was not incorrectly shot and killed. And this, again, has to do with the number of people of color who get inadvertently shot and killed in situations in which people without color don't. And I'd ask for your support.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a question for the sponsor of this amendment, my good colleague, the senator from Denver. So, as I read this amendment, the immunity wouldn't apply if the deadly force was used against the other person because of that person's race, color, ancestry, religion, et cetera, or sexual orientation. So, if a woman in her business was sitting there late one night and a man broke in, a very large man, we don't know what his race might be, she reaches in the top desk drawer, shoots him. Would this apply if when the police come to investigate and they say, why did you shoot him? And she says, I shot him because he was a very large man who broke into my offices and I feared for my life. I don't see gender anywhere at all. So is this intended to apply to gender or just sexual orientation? And I'm wondering about that. Conversely, if a man were sitting in his office late one night and someone broke in and he reached into his desk drawer and shot the person, and when the police showed up and they said, well, why did you shoot this person? If he says, I shot her because she's a woman, and he was an out-and-out misogynist, I think that's okay because he thinks that woman was there to commit a crime. I'm just wondering how this applies, Senator. Perhaps you could shed some light on it.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked the bill drafter to draft it such that people who were in protected classes were protected. So perhaps we could take a senatorial 5 and ask the drafter why sex is not in here.
Senator Aguilar, are you requesting a senatorial 5? Yes, I'm requesting. We'll be in a senatorial 5. will come back to order. Colleagues, we're on discussion of Amendment L006. I understand there's further discussion. Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When a person breaks into your place of business and is coming at you aggressively, where and when is it appropriate to ask the person who's breaking in what is their sexual orientation, since you don't know, and ask them about their mental disabilities, if they have any or not? And when is the proper time to ask them what religion or national origin they are? I really can't see that you'd have much time. Perhaps a checklist on the outside of your business might be appropriate, because I just don't know where a business owner would have the time to make this assertion, you know, in the case of a aggressive break-in.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe that, you know, this has been a pretty interesting bill to listen to. I think when we're talking about protected class, I think we should include every human being, because that's what we're talking about. I'm not sure that, you know, I'm not sure I can support the bill, because what is it we're doing? What is it we're trying to achieve that is not already on the books? You know, I don't see where this really benefits our society to say you have the right to stand your ground on a business, because in my world, my business is agricultural land. You know, we're out there after dark all the time, and you know, to insinuate that we can actually shoot somebody, you know, I'm having a big problem with this entire bill, and I think we ought to just take a look at this and see what we're doing. We have laws on the book to protect businesses at this point in time. If you are basically threatened bodily harm, you have the right to protect yourself. So I'm not sure what exactly we're doing on this entire issue of stand your ground. But as far as, you know, protected class, I think we should say all human beings belong in protected class. Thank you.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly adding to this discussion of if you're going to ask someone what their race or sexual orientation is, I think there's some confusion on what this bill does, because it talks about it talks about immunity from criminal prosecution, right? So that's why this amendment's important, because it'll remove that automatic immunity until you know, investigators and prosecutors can determine if there was racism or stereotyping or some other motive in shooting someone than just the act of defense. So again, it's this bill is immunity from criminal prosecution. This bill comes into effect after the person has been killed, and this amendment clarifies that when the detectives, police, and everyone gets to looking at what happened during this shooting, that if there were different, perhaps, motives involved than just someone crossing a threshold. Thank you.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. I think there is some confusion on this amendment, because it's not going to put a requirement for a business to have a checklist outside their door or whatever, and they have to check this. I'm not quite sure of the logic on that one, but this is not going to require a checklist. This is not going to require the person who is feeling threatened to ask any questions of the attacker. They're not going to be asking them any questions about their sexual orientation. What this amendment does, L006, it does not grant automatic immunity for these protective classes. That's what it does. And I believe they need that special protection because of the research and the statistics that are shown that whenever you have a white person with a gun, a business owner, and a black intruder, based on the color of their skin, a brown intruder, the end result is going to be a dead body, most likely. And you know what the percentages are? The percentages are really high. And I do have statistics to support what I'm saying. If you have an opportunity, pull the report from the Urban Institute. We're talking about justifiable homicides. Justified homicide, when it is a white on black homicide, the numbers are outrageous as it compares to a white on white justification. So basically what that says is that there is this inherent bias when someone has a dark complexion. They feel a little bit more threatened, and sometimes they just rush to judgment and they shoot first. And if they do shoot first, then what this amendment says, you don't get automatic immunity until it's been clearly investigated and the merits of the attack or the murder or the injury is proven to be that it wasn't based on bias, that it wasn't based on race. I can cite you several examples where people were perceived that they were threatened because someone was the tall. I think we had a senator from El Paso, describe this tall person. Just imagine a tall, burly black man with a hoodie on. And he comes into your business and you're threatened and startled. You don't get automatic immunity, and that's what L006 is about.
Senator Aguilar, I do have another amendment up here from you. I'll defer to you. Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to withdraw Amendment L006, and I would like to move Amendment L007.
Mr. Carpenter, will you please read Amendment L007 so we can discuss it?
Amendment L007,
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bill drafter did come up. Thank you for giving me that senatorial 5. What he said was that in different sections of law, there are different protected statuses, and that he inadvertently missed gender. So L007 provides the same protections to classes, but in this time does include gender. Thank you, Senator Gardner, for pointing that out to me.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess the senator from Denver ought to consult with me further. I have another question about this amendment. The immunity does not apply if the owner or occupant used deadly force against the other person because of that person's, well, let me just choose gender. And what if that person breaks into my office late one night and I fear for my life and I shoot him because I thought he was a man, and then when the police arrive and they do an investigation, it turns out it was a woman. The way this reads is, I used deadly force because of that person's gender. Well, I was wrong and mistaken about the gender, so I assume the immunity still applies. I would ask the senator from Denver, is that the way this works?
Senator Aguilar.
I guess what I would say is that the part of the intent of this is for people to ask questions first and shoot later. And so he would have the option to shoot this person in the thigh and not kill them, and then when the police came, they could work it out. What I don't want to see are young black and brown children on the floors of businesses because somebody had the belief that they might be committing a crime.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My point is, and my point to the senator from Denver, this amendment, the way it's drafted and the way that it would apply in the real world, it is fatally flawed. I ask for no vote.
Senator Lundberg, then Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come to the microphone to oppose this amendment and to point something out that I haven't heard in the debate yet, which I believe is very important, and that is that Senate Bill 185 deals with expanding the current law that, at least in my opinion, has worked well for defending one's home. This amendment not only deals with the expansion that 185 puts in place, but it places this same constraint on what is the current law, so that in your home you are now confronted with this whole extra set of dilemmas and problems. And even as the good senator from Colorado Springs gave the example of the lady who was in her office late at night, she could just as easily be in her bedroom late at night, and the same issues are there. I quite concur with the senator from Colorado Springs. The amendment is fatally flawed in several respects.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will let you know that I will withdraw this, and I'm having him drafted again to clarify that it's only for if it happens in your business. Thank you.
Senate Bill, or Amendment 7 to Senate Bill 185 has been withdrawn. Is there further discussion on Senate Bill 185? We'll be in a senatorial 5. Committee will come back to order. Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I withdraw Amendment L007, and I would like to move Amendment L008.
Let's read Amendment L008. Mr. Carpenter, will you please help us out there?
Amendment L008, Senate Bill 185 by Senator Aguilar, amend printed bill, page 2, strike line 24.
Senator Aguilar?
Substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Senator Lundberg is correct that the amendment L007 as drafted applies both to the standing law and to the change proposed in Senate Bill 185. Excuse me. And while I personally might like that change, I think it's fair to say that today what we're debating is Senate Bill 185. So what Amendment L008 does is that it only excludes from immunity if the person who used deadly force was an owner, manager, or employee of a business who used the deadly force. So it allows the homeowner the same protections that currently exist under the law and inserts this new exemption from immunity only for business owners. And I'd ask for your aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment 8? Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask the sponsor of the amendment. I know there was a comment before and regarding persons with color, persons without color. I'm not sure who you were meaning about persons without color. If you could clarify that for me. But also, with the bill, how we identify or how somebody in a business who is facing a threat from somebody that has actually broken into their business, that they believe is doing bodily harm, they're not there in a legal manner, how they focus on their ancestry, their religion, their national origin, their physical or mental disabilities. If you could help me out with that.
Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, this amendment, should it pass, will not change the decision-making process and doesn't require a change in the decision-making process at the time of the shooting. Where it changes the decision-making process is at the time of a court hearing. And I'll just quickly lay out for you how these things will play out. Person shoots person. Shooting is reported to the police. Police decide, we'll refer this for prosecution. Prosecutor then brings charges. The charges are laid against the business person who shot the other person. But the business person then says, wait a minute, this prosecution cannot continue because I am immune from prosecution. The prosecutor says, no, you're not immune. The shooter says, yes, I am. And then they find themselves in court. And the court is deciding one question only. Have the conditions for immunity been fulfilled in this case? And the court will make an inquiry. That inquiry will say, was there an unlawful entry? That inquiry will ask or seek to determine, as a matter of fact, whether or not the person was reasonably believed to have committed a crime or be in the process of committing a crime, and so on. And if this amendment should pass, the court will also ask a very important question. Was the reason behind this shooting because of the person's race, color, gender, ancestry, etc.? So it is the court that will be deciding whether that was the motivating factor of the shooting, in whole or in part. And if it was, then the court will declare, you don't have immunity, this prosecution can go forward. That is where the decision-making point lies, and that is a perfectly sensible thing for the court to ask when deciding whether or not you are immune from prosecution. And that's what this amendment does. It doesn't require the shooter to think about the sexual orientation of the person they're just about to shoot. Of course, that would be ridiculous. It requires the court to assess whether the motivation for the shooting was a protected class membership.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here we have the situation. We have an owner, manager, employee of a business. A person comes into that business. That individual that owns the business or is lawfully present in the business finds a person who has made an unlawful entry into that business, or place their dwelling or place of business, and when the occupant or the owner, manager, or employee has a reasonable belief that such other person has committed a crime in that dwelling or place of business, in addition to the uninvited entry, or is committing or intends to commit a crime against a person or property in addition to the uninvited entry. And when the occupant reasonably believes that the other person might use any physical force, no matter how slight, against an occupant of the dwelling or place of business. That is what we're talking about, protection for the business owner. That's it. There's a lot of pieces there that have to be in place. To say that these other pieces, which nobody can determine, at least upon the point of entry or upon the situation, have some kind of play in this, seems a little preposterous to me. And also to say that we put something into law, but it won't matter to anybody. Oh, it's not going to matter. It's ridiculous that we'd even worry about this. When somebody comes in and in that situation, I think that is a little bit outrageous. So, colleagues, gets back to the original amendment, urge a no vote. This is about people being able to protect their place of business, their employees, and their customers that are there in a lawful manner. And the other issues that will come up in an investigation will all be apparent without this amendment. Without this amendment. Urge a no vote.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I think the only point that my colleague that happens to have a piece of Denver in his district. Oh, and by the way, I need to talk with my daughter who's a physics major, because I remember that the absence of color was what made white. And so that's why I said people without color, but I could be wrong. I'll have to look up the physics definition for white, but that's what I thought it was, and that's why the people with no color came to mind. Anyway, on a separate issue, here's my concern is that what we're also allowing them to do, exempting or giving the immunity for, is deadly physical force. And so this is, again, where we go back to the protected class. Guy comes in, he looks like Trayvon Martin, makes you scared, you shoot him and kill him, and you're exempted, whether he had a weapon or not. Now, guy comes in and has a gun in his hand, and they find his body there on the ground with a gun next to him. Yeah, they're going to let you off, but they don't need this law to do that. And so I think because of the unintended consequences of this law, if we are going to pass it and truly say that murder is okay just because you were scared, then we need some protections for people from protected classes. And I'd ask for an aye vote on L008.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I support Amendment L008. I think the good senator from
Colorado.
From Colorado, unincorporated Jefferson County. He said something that, like, and let me know if this needs to be corrected. He said something, what does people with color or without color have to do with it? I was wondering if you can clarify if that's exactly what you said, Senator.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment was specifically toward religion, ancestry. I think there were a couple of other things which could not be determined, I don't believe, by anybody in that situation. So glad to correct that for you.
Senator Fields. Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that changes my comments a little bit, because I was going to talk about how race matters. Because it does. And when you talk about deadly force, that really matters as it relates to race. Because as I've mentioned before, I have statistics and research that says whenever you use deadly force, when is it white on white person and the attacker or the person that threatens is black, the likelihood if that person end up being dead is greater than if it was white on white. So race does matter when you talk about deadly force. I can give you several examples, high-profile examples, where justifiable homicide was rendered. So race is really important when we're talking about this topic. But this amendment specifically talks about not granting automatic immunity for protected classes when there is an intruder in a line of business. I believe they deserve to have that extra chance because we all come through life with certain experiences, and there are people who are threatened by the color of someone's skin. And it's accidental. And the good senator from incorporated Jefferson County went through the bill. He went through page 2. And what really bothers me about page 2, line 18, it mentions no matter how slight. That means that if someone is breaking an area, so they're inside McDonald's or whatever, and they're getting some food, and they're running out with a hamburger, it might be justifiable in law, but was it necessary to shoot and kill that person? Let's say it's a food truck, and the person is living in the food truck, or it could be a car that's locked and the window is open because a teenager sees a can of soda. He gets that can of soda, and the owner of that vehicle shows up, and the owner shoots and kills that teenager. It's justifiable, maybe, but was it necessary to take someone's life over a soda? I don't think so. So that that statement on line 18, no matter how slight, is a statement in reference to how we value property over life. And so I think what L00, I think we're now on 7, right?
We're on Amendment 8, actually.
We're on Amendment 8, gives that actual opportunity for us to investigate, to determine that it should be labeled justifiable homicide without it automatically being granted. I think that's reasonable. I think that's the right thing to do.
Senator Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I rise in support of L008 and have a bit of historical context to put this in, some very recent history and also some history of our country reaching back quite a ways. Reading some excerpts from an article from Slate.com titled Racial Blindness and subtitled Violent Murderers in Texas and Maryland Show How White Killers Receive More Sympathy Than Black Victims. It's from March 23rd. So this past week has offered a case study in how race shapes empathy and blame. Take Mark Anthony Condit, the 23-year-old who terrorized Austin, Texas with a series of bombings. After listening to his confession tape, local officials have ruled out hate as a motive in a set of attacks that took 2 lives and injured several others. Condit's message, it was explained, was the outcry of a very challenged young man talking about challenges in his personal life. Condit wasn't a terrorist. According to the officials, the term we usually affix to people who organize bombings. He was simply lashing out. Or consider Austin Rollins, the 17-year-old shooter at a school in southern Maryland. He shot 2 students, one of them his ex-girlfriend, before he was killed. And the officials say the shooting was not a random act of violence. The girl, Jaylene Willie, was likely the target. Relaying this information, the Associated Press led with a small bit of editorializing. Tuesday's school shooting in southern Maryland that left the shooter dead and 2 students wounded increasingly appears to be the action of a lovesick teenager.
Senator Kerr, it does seem that you're wandering a bit off the amendment that we're on here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this article goes exactly to the intent of why this amendment is very important if this bill were to pass. And as I explained, it is a bit of historical context, both recent and a little bit older than more recent. So the shooter, the actions of a lovesick teenager. Not an attempted murderer, was he called, or someone acting on a poisonous amount of masculine entitlement, a lovesick teenager. And look to last month, and even Nicholas Cruz, the teenage gunman who killed 17 people at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, was quickly identified as an orphan with a troubled past, a surprisingly sympathetic way to describe a deadly shooter responsible for one of the worst school massacres in American history. Beyond these recent examples are a litany of times where white suspects of violence are presented as full individuals. Soft-spoken, polite, a gentleman is how local media described Elliot Rodger after he killed 7 people in a 2014 murder spree near the campus of UC Santa Barbara. Now compare this to the now infamous New York Times story on Michael Brown, described as, quote, no angel for his occasional delinquency and dabbling in drugs and alcohol. Brown was killed in a confrontation, and he was unarmed. To be white, male, and suspected of a serious crime is, in the eyes of much of the media, to still be a full individual entitled to respect and dignity. Your actions are treated as an isolated incident, not indicative of a larger pathology shared by others who occupy your social position or hold your religious beliefs. To be black, or to be Muslim or undocumented, is to lose that nuance, even if you're the victim. After Trayvon Martin's shooting death at the hands of George Zimmerman in 2012, NBC News ran a story announcing one fact, that Martin had been suspended 3 times from school. In Austin, the same officials who would present Mark Anthony Condit as suffering from angst were, just a week earlier, treating his first victim, a 29-year-old black man named Anthony Stephen House, as a suspect in his own death. We can't rule out that Mr. House didn't construct this himself and accidentally detonate it, an Austin official told reporters at the time. A 2017 study commissioned by the advocacy organization Color of Change found that news media consistently portrayed black families and individuals as criminal, with that criminality flowing from the internal disposition of black people versus an external problem with historic roots. This is racism, but it's not the crude hatred of the white supremacist. It's rather a broad sympathy towards some and broader skepticism towards other, as the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates has put it. The only way to understand that skepticism is to grasp the ways racism has shaped definitions of personhood and citizenship over the course of 400 years. In particular, it's important to understand how whiteness, defined as a status conferring distinct social, political, and economic freedoms across an unequal property order, is tied to American ideas around freedom and liberty. So Thomas Jefferson, to use one prominent example, understood the American project as requiring either racial domination of indigenous people and enslaved Americans or their outright removal. Why not retain and incorporate the blacks into the state, wrote Jefferson after describing his plan to remove free blacks in the event of emancipation before answering with a litany of reasons. Deep-rooted prejudices entertained by the whites, 10,000 recollections by the blacks of the injuries they have sustained, new provocations, the real distinctions which nature has made, and many other circumstances will divide us into parties and produce convulsions which will probably never end, but in the extermination of one or the other race. He simply couldn't imagine, in this description here, an American democracy that wasn't fully white. Let me add a little editorial, the history teacher in me, that this is, of course, one quote taken from one of our founding fathers that, among many thousands of writings he did, and I certainly understand that. This understanding that one cannot be black and American, or rather that one must be white to be American, continued into the 19th century and was expressed succinctly by Chief Justice Roger Taney in his Dred Scott opinion. Quote, "They are not included and were not
We are appreciating the minority report. I wonder if you might continue to get specifically to the amendment?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. And I apologize if in order to fully explain the meaning of this article and the support that this article lends to the importance of this amendment strays in a little bit. I have cut some of the pieces out to make it a little bit more succinct. But I do believe that the pieces of it that I've pulled out are very important to understand the underpinnings and the structure of why this amendment is very important to this bill. As Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote in his Dred Scott opinion, they were not intended to be included. To the contrary, they are considered as a subordinate and inferior class of beings who had been subjugated by the dominant race and had no rights or privileges, but such as those the government might choose to grant them. And then even after emancipation and the Reconstruction Amendments granted citizenship and civil rights to the former slaves, the twin engines of capital accumulation and race prejudice drove the creation of a racial caste system, with whiteness distinguishing the bottom from the top. W.E.B. Du Bois famously called it a public and psychological wage that gave deference and flattery to whites, in addition to material benefits and opportunities for advancement. I'm going to skip a little bit here. The housing discrimination, subsidized suburbs, and urban renewal of the mid-20th century turned various European Americans into, quote, whites who could coexist and intermarry while also creating the segregation and racial wealth and inequality we live with today. Despite narratives of colorblindness and post-racialism, the United States remains a racial polity structured, as philosopher Charles Mills writes in The Racial Contract, to maintain and reproduce this racial order, securing the privileges and advantages of the full white citizens and maintaining the subordination of non-whites. Which brings us back to this question of race and empathy, which is exactly when we talk here that such immunity does not apply if the person who used deadly force was an owner, manager, or employee of a business who used deadly force against the other person because of that person's, and then we have our list. You no longer need whiteness to vote or participate in civil society, although given recent attacks on voting rights, it doesn't hurt. But it continues to mark boundaries of citizenship and belonging, even if the borders aren't as firm as they were in the past. There are important exceptions, but looking at the broad sweep of American society, to possess whiteness is still to receive, as one of its benefits, recognition as a full person, even in the face of criminal behavior. When we see officials defer to the self-spun narrative of a serial bomber or to watch news outlets attribute misogynistic violence to lovesickness, while denying the same interiority and full humanity to black victims or offenders, we're watching this pattern play out. When black communities are pathologized for facing violence, but white communities escape similar treatment after producing mass killers, we're watching this pattern play out. And when whiteness appears to shift even the usual blame for state violence, we are watching this pattern play out. Please vote aye on L008.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment 8? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 8 to Senate Bill 185. Division has been called. Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment L008 to Senate Bill 185. Will everyone please be seated for me? All those in favor of L008, please stand. Please have a seat. Colleagues, all those opposed to Amendment L008, please stand. Amendment L008 is lost. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 185? Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 185. To the bill. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
While I was discussing this bill with some of my colleagues and friends, one of the questions I had was how does the bill sponsor envision this playing out in large business properties? And the example that, of course, I would bring up is my business property is a ranch. And so does the sponsor intend that this would impact all acreage of my ranch or just the immediate building areas? So would like some clarity on that. Thank you.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the question from my colleague from Vail. So the way I would anticipate this bill, when it relates to business owners, would be the exact same way that the bill is written currently, as it is to protect people in their own home. So remember that the bill is predicated upon unlawful entry. So after unlawful entry were to have occurred, it would apply the same as it would towards your home.
Senator Donovan. The motion before the body is Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your patience on 185. I believe it deserves our attention because all across the nation, we're discussing gun violence. We're not only discussing it in our state, it's a discussion that's taking place across our nation and around the world. And you know what we're doing? We're talking about a Colorado solution to add more magpoles in our society. Is that the remedy we have for the young people who are crying and urging adults to take ownership of this issue as it relates to gun violence? The best Colorado solution the state Senate has is you get a magpole.
Senator Fields, you might be talking about my bill, which is up next.
So what Senate Bill 185 will do, oh my goodness, I'm in the wrong bill. Can I get...
We could pay it forward, I suppose.
Mr. Chair.
Sure thing, Senator.
I was on another bill, but the concept is still the same in reference to what kind of solution does the Colorado State Senate believes is the best for our society and for our streets. And the solution that I'm hearing right now is that you can have a magazine, ammunition to hold. I'm going to give up. You gave me the wrong same bill. Mr. Chair and members.
Senator Fields, you got this. Third time's a charm.
Yes. Justifiable homicide. Justifiable homicide. When you talk about justifiable homicide and race, the end result is not going to be favorable if you're someone of color. We don't need this bill. We don't need this bill, Senate Bill 18185. Can you hand me the statute? Mr. Chair and members, I looked at the statute as it relates to Senate Bill 185, and I'm in Title 18. And if you look on page 4, Title 18, I'm looking at section 18-1701. The statute already provides protection for dwellers. There's already, you can use physical force in special relationships. You can use physical force in defense of a person. You can use deadly force against an intruder. You can use physical force in defense of your dwelling. You can use a physical force in defense of your property. And it goes on and on and on. So we already have this in statute. There is no good reason during the current climate as it relates to gun violence for us to expand this statute to include business owners. And it doesn't just include business owners when you look at what it does. Look at it. It includes not only the owners, it includes managers and the employees of the business. That goes way too far. And then it also says that you can use deadly force no matter how slight. It really does give a sense that the priority is over property more than life. And I shared an example earlier because I'm really concerned about young people, because young people do some stupid things, and the consequences for doing stupid things shouldn't mean their life. We know that sometimes teenagers might break into, let's say, a gym to just play basketball, and they're inside there, and then someone shoots them. Yeah, they were entered unlawfully, but was it necessary for us to shoot that young person down dead? The business could be closed, and maybe the owner is still in the facility, and the young person is getting a pack of gum, and he shoots them and he kills them. I'm concerned about how this bill is going to impact our young people when they inadvertently find themselves in a place that should have been closed. They're in there by mistake. Maybe they thought it was still open, and then they're shot down and they're murdered. And when this happens under this bill, they have immunity. And the immunity means that, you don't have any punishment as it relates to civil or criminal liability. Did you know that law enforcement doesn't even have that kind of exemption? We have a situation in California, Sacramento, where a young person was, you guys are talking too loud over there. Thank you. We had a situation where a young person was in his own home. The police chase him, they shoot and kill him. In that situation, the police officer is not going to get blanket immunity, especially as it relates to civil liability. It's going to be investigated. But here we're introducing a law that our local law enforcement don't have the opportunity to have, because they aren't immune from civil liability. A family could sue a police department. But here we want to extend immunity. No matter how slight. This could be something really, really minor. No matter how slight, we're giving them the immunity. That's not fair. I believe that we should be protecting life over property. I believe that this bill goes too far. I believe that the statutes that we currently have already address protection of property. They already can have physical force. And so we don't need to expand it. And truly, this is a stand your ground for business. It's like make your day, shoot first. It's the wrong solution for Colorado when we're dealing with a nationwide focus and attention on gun violence. And the state Senate wants to expand stand your ground laws, make my day law, gun smoke legislation for businesses. I think that's poor public policy for our state. So I would suggest that you vote no.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I assure you I will be brief, but I believe there are a couple of things that need to be made clear, and one is this is not a protection for property. This is a protection for people. Secondly, this is not a dangerous notion. This has been on the books for homes for some decades at this point. It has worked well because it is a way for people to defend themselves and their families, and this simply extends that protection to their place of business as well. I believe it is a very appropriate step. It's been proven in practice, and it is, again, a protection for people. This does save lives.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 185? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 185. All those in favor say, colleagues, division has been called. Colleagues, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 185. Will all those in favor of Senate Bill 185 please stand? Please be seated. Colleagues, this is serious. We're not supposed to have any fun in here tonight. Can we? Seriously, no. All those opposed to Senate Bill 185, please stand. Colleagues, thanks to our two class cut-ups in the back, for the first time in Senate history, we have 2/3 of a vote on a division. So, colleagues, Senate Bill 185 is adopted. We will be in a brief senatorial file.
Senate will come back to order. The coat rule is still relaxed. Will the clerk please read the title of Senate Bill 52?
Senate Bill 52 by Senator Hill, Representative Humphrey and Singh, concerning the repeal of certain provisions concerning ammunition magazines.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 52. Colleagues, I'm sure we'll have much discussion on this, but I just want to lay out. I know we're going to have a discussion about the Second Amendment and what that means. And maybe part of the reason I brought this up, I think that's an important discussion that we need to have. I think it's, given all that's going on, I think it's an important discussion, it's a necessary discussion, but I also want to highlight and focus on the impracticality of what we are trying to do in the 21st century. I worked on kind of my own personal experiment over the last couple of weeks with 3D printers. And colleagues, what we're working on banning here is something that you can buy on the internet quite freely, something that you can print literally in a school craft shop, a school library in some cases, in your local public library. It's a piece of plastic. And I'm concerned what we've done is we've created a system whereby we're unfairly criminalizing many of our military members as they get out, many folks who are moving here as Colorado is such a rocking place to live right now, as well as putting law enforcement in a difficult situation where we've asked them to enforce something that's next to impossible to enforce. And we have, overall, we have not made Coloradans safer. Rather, we have perpetuated, under good intention, but poor policy, we have perpetuated a law that is on our books that is not doing anything to reduce gun violence and yet continues to restrict the opportunities and the freedoms of law-abiding Coloradans. And that's why I brought Senate Bill 52.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 52? Seeing none, Senator Court.
At least you got my name right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. When we were in committee and we discussed this bill, the room was overflow with people who opposed this bill. There were only about, I think, maybe half a dozen who supported it. and at least 3 dozen, I think, 2 to 3 dozen, who opposed it. I was one of the sponsors when this bill was in the House in 2013. And there is absolutely no way I would ever vote to repeal any of what we did in 2013. We did that for the safety of the people of Colorado. We did that for the constituents who had been telling us then that they wanted gun safety legislation. And now we are hearing from students, young people all over the country who are saying, please protect us. Do more to protect us, not less. I can't fathom why this could be a good idea. The only reason you need more than 15 bullets is to shoot more. When do you need to shoot more? When you're target practicing? You can probably take 5 seconds to change the magazine and get more bullets. But when you are at a school to try to murder innocent children, that's when you're going to say, oh, it'd be great to have a bigger magazine so I could have more bullets. There is no real justification to repeal this magazine limit. This is not about target practice. This is not about personal freedom. This is about protecting children. That's what this is about. Yesterday on the news, I heard a story, interview, with 2 women who were librarians. One had been at Sandy Hook, and one had been at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And while the one at Marjory Stoneman Douglas was crouching in the room with the children, she was thinking about her lifelong friend who had had the same thing happen to her in Sandy Hook, and thinking, my God, this is how pervasive it is. 2 people who have been friends for life, who were both educators, have been in this situation. There is absolutely no good reason for us to repeal the magazine limit and make it possible for people to have more bullets to go into our schools and shoot more children. There is no good reason. I wouldn't even think of voting for this, and I hope my colleagues will join me in voting no on this horrible bill.
Senator Fields.
Now is my chance. Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to do a little replay as I talk about the national discussion that we're having right now as it relates to gun violence, because we're talking about guns again. But this bill, Senate Bill 52, I oppose, is a very personal bill to me, because my community was attacked July 20th, where we had an armed person who goes into a theater with an assault rifle that held over 100 bullets. 100 bullets. The theater that he entered was a theater that I took my grandchildren to. My parents would take my grandchildren to that theater. But this shooter goes into the theater with an AR rifle that was able to hold 100 bullets. And the reason he did that is because he wanted to be able to shoot as many people as he could in a short matter of time. That's what magazines do. It's their ammunition, their bullets that are put in this magazine, and right now in the state of Colorado, we limit that to 15. If we repeal that, then what we're saying is that you can have a magazine that can have 30 bullets in it, 60 bullets in it, whatever the capacity is, but we're going to be repealing it. And when you do that, you're making it possible for people to have access to those bullets in that magazine to do the same thing that they did at the Aurora Theater shooting. The only reason that that shooter didn't kill more people is because that gun jammed. And that gave time for law enforcement to go in there to save additional lives. In Tucson, Gabby Gifford, an AR-15 was used in that case. And when that shooter was trying to reload, two people, they were elderly people, one was 60-something, another was 70-something, was able to intervene and attack the shooter. That's one of the justifications for having a limitation of 15, is because it gives a stand-byer an opportunity to intervene to stop the carnage, to stop the killing. If you allow for a situation to have more bullets, then that means that you can kill more people. I need to, first of all, to let you know that I do support the First Amendment right, the Second Amendment right to bear arms. First. First, second? All of them. But I believe our kids are asking us to do something. Our kids are experiencing lockdown drills in school. Did you know that? Kids are frightened to go to school because they're wondering if their school going to be next. Can you imagine when I went to school, we had the duck and cover drills. But these students are having to do lockdown drills for active shooters. Our kids' life is worth more than bullets that you can have in a gun. As I said before, this is not the Colorado way. This bill is saving lives, and Colorado is leading the way as it relates to gun safety reform measures. We have universal background checks. We have a limitation on magazines, which is 15. And kids are asking me to do all I can to protect them. They're asking us to take action. And it's unbelievable that we want to put legislation that's been in place for some time in reverse. We want to go back. And our society, especially our young people, are asking us to do more. Large capacity magazines are intended to be used in war. My father used an AR-15 in Vietnam. There's no need for citizens to have an assault rifle that carries 50 bullets, 100 bullets. It's just not necessary. It only takes seconds. I believe someone said 3 seconds to reload a magazine. 3 seconds. And you can have as many of those magazines as you want. That's not an inconvenience. When I was out campaigning, knocking on doors, and I was in the rural part of my district, and I was asked about this legislation, the 15 limit. And she wasn't quite sure about all of the bill, so I explained the limitation, and she told me she only needed one good shot. And so she supported the limit because she said she only needed one good shot. And she has a farm, and I think she has like 15 acres. And she needs to have access to her firearm because we're not quite sure, she wasn't quite sure how long it might take law enforcement to get out to that ranch. But if she didn't want any kind of magazines that would carry more than 15 bullets. She didn't want that. But yet we want to give access to the people of Colorado to repeal the magazine limit by having them to have more than 15 bullets in that chamber. Have you been watching? Have you been watching and have you been listening? I know you're not here. I don't see anybody here. But thank you. But I'm just, you know, I'm kind of concerned because there's nobody in here. This is a very serious issue. Kids are dying. We had a Las Vegas shooter in a hotel. I don't know what floor he was on, but he used a high-capacity magazine to shoot down at a parking lot where people were enjoying music. He killed 58 people. Are you listening? Are you hearing the trauma that takes place when you use a high-capacity magazine? And I've talked to my coroner, because when you use a handgun, the kind of damage that it takes place when it strikes the body, oftentimes it goes in and out. But with a high-capacity magazine, it's my understanding, and talking to the coroner, is that it does tremendous damage to the organs. We do not need that type of weapons, a military-type weapon that can hold all of these bullets. That's just not, it's just not the right thing to do as it relates to public safety. Sandy Hook, babies. And because of the Sandy Hook situation, they were able to intervene, and 11 students were able to escape that situation because of the shooter trying to reload. That's what is the significant piece about this, because it gives law enforcement, it gives other people the opportunity to intervene when these kinds of crises are going around and they're happening in our communities and in our state. Are you listening? Are you hearing me? The common thread that all of these school shootings have is a high-capacity magazine. Columbine, AR-15. Virginia Tech, AR-15. Tucson was at a grocery store, AR-15. Texas Church, AR-15. Orlando, Pulse nightclub, AR-15. Parkland, the most recent shooting at a school. No, it's not recent. I think there's been another one since then. The common thread is an assault rifle that's using high-capacity magazine. A high-capacity magazine is the weapon of choice for school shooters. Thousands and hundreds of kids have marched in Denver, Washington, D.C., all across the nation, and international locations. And it's shameful that we're thinking about repealing the high-capacity magazine law that we have. It's like, really? These kids are asking us to save their lives because they don't want to be next? And we want to give people more ammunition? Is that the best solution Colorado has? Is more bullets? I don't think so. That is not the Colorado way. We've been operating now, I'm not quite sure, I think it was 2013 when that legislation was passed and signed by the governor. And this is the time for us to be forward-thinking. This is not the time to retreat, to shrink, and give the community and citizens more bullets. They can still have them. They're still for sale, but the limitation is just going to be 15. I think that's reasonable. You can have as many magazine units as you want, but the limitation is going to be 15. That's what the current law is. I'd like to see it stay that way. Because if we don't, then bystanders won't have the opportunity to intervene and reload. It's a safety measure. It's just one small safety measure that is already law. It is already practice. We do not need to be feeding our communities, our streets, our churches, our malls, our event centers with more ammunition. Our kids need books. They don't need to be doing these lockdown active shooter drills, but that's the society that we live in. You've heard the commercial. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Are you listening to the kids? They're asking for adults to take ownership and to help them solve this problem. And if you talk to any of the Parkland students or any of the students from Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, they will tell you that this is not the solution that they're seeking. They're not seeking a solution to have more ammunition. Did you hear them? I heard them. And they were inspiring to listen to. They have taken control of this topic and this issue, and they want change. And the change that they're asking for is not for more bullets to be in the streets and in guns. We all know Tom Sullivan. If he was here today, I'm quite sure he would tell you the same. Oppose this bill. He lost his son in the Aurora Theater shooting. He describes the situation where a shooter goes in there with his high-capacity magazine, just shooting up people. My community, that was a direct attack on my community. It's no way that I can get up here and say, repeal it. I believe in the Aurora Theater shooting, 58 people were injured and several lost their lives. And one of them was Tom Sullivan. He did that much damage in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Emma from Parkland, Florida, stood there for 6 minutes because that's how much time it took for the shooter to go through that school and to kill 17 others. And there's more that have been injured. And the Colorado solution from the state Senate is to pass Senate Bill 52 to give people more bullets. That is not the best policy that we should be offering students who are currently in crisis dealing with gun violence. I don't want to offer them that solution. Can't we do something else? There's got to be a better solution besides giving people more bullets. Colorado State Senate, Are you listening? Is the only answer a gun with more bullets? I'm standing and fighting for students who are fighting for their lives. I'm standing with the students. They just had a march for their lives Saturday. And the Colorado State Senate wants to give more bullets. You can have access to more bullets. I just don't think that's the right solution. And I don't think that's the Colorado way. And I'm going to take my time on this topic because it means that much to me. Because it's not just the people who lost their lives in Aurora, it's also the trauma that happens after those mass shootings, where they have the common thread of an AR-15 or assault rifle. I don't go into that theater anymore. I can't go in there. It's open. It is open for business. I was invited to go to the grand opening. They secured the theater that had the shooting in, so that's no longer used for theater use. But I couldn't go back in there. And I watched the students from Parkland. And it's hard for me to imagine what it's like for them to have to go back in that school. After a shooter went in there with an AR-15, I don't know how many times he reloaded, but he had lots of ammunition. Even the Aurora Theater, his car was full of ammunition. Why do you need to have all that ammunition anyway? Well, it's legal, he could have it. But is it necessary? Is it necessary for us to have these assault weapons in our community, in our churches, that can carry more than the limit that we require at 15? Is it really necessary for us to go to 30? I think that we can still be safe, and I think we can still be reasonable, and that's what we have done. I wish those Parkland students were here today and they could have access to this podium. They will tell you straight up, no. This is not the right solution. This is not the remedy. And I know for sure that this is not the right Colorado solution to address gun violence. It's just not. So as I close, I want us to think very carefully about the message that we're sending to our youth and to the parents and to families who are really scared about school safety. And one thing I think they would not want is access to more bullets that you can hold in a gun. I think we need more kids in our schools and less ammo in a gun. I went to a church service on Sunday, and the pastor gave up the pulpit, and he just let the young people come up on stage. And he had chairs and sofas, and it looked like a town hall, but in a comfortable setting. And the kids talked about how frightened they are and what kinds of solutions that they would like. None of those students asked for more bullets that could be in a gun chamber. No one asked for it. They were saying, I don't want to be next. And our solution is to feed our streets with more bullets. And when we have more access to more bullets, then someone is going to pull the trigger. They're going to pull the trigger on that magazine, and if we repeal it, then they will be able to pull that trigger, and they'll be able to shoot it as long as they can based on whatever many bullets that they have in that chamber. 30, 60, 100, whatever it is. I don't think we need to be giving that kind of instrument and access to all of those bullets in a gun in our community. Let's not pull that trigger to retreat and repeal on the 15 limitation. Let's not pull that trigger. Those kids said that they were sick and tired of lockdown drills. They're doing drills before they can learn how to read. And the Colorado State Senate wants to repeal the mag limit. I think those kids would be saying, really? That's your best idea? When they have to go to school with the fear of school shootings? The best idea that we have in the state Senate is to repeal the magazine limit? I hope not. Our state is bigger than that. You can still have 100 bullets. It's just the chamber will only keep 15. Let's give these kids an opportunity where they can escape if there's an active shooter in that school. If he has all this ammunition, sometimes it's hard. Kids were ducking under desks, hiding in closets. And the best solution the state Senate has is to repeal the magazine limit. I think that's a poor policy solution for a time like this. Thank you.
Senator Merrifield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this is the fourth time that I have talked at the microphone in opposition to this bill. So I'm not going to repeat all the things that I'm assuming you remember that I said last year and the year before and the year before. I'll quote experts, more experts than I, from CNN. An analysis performed for CNN found that states that have enacted magazine restrictions are associated with fewer mass shooting events. Whether a state has a large capacity ammunition magazine ban is a single best predictor of the mass shooting rate in that state, said Michael Siegel, a community health science professor at Boston University, who conducted the analysis. These states are associated with 63% lower rate of mass shootings, according to his analysis. So why are we doing this? According to the study, we are going in the wrong direction. And new research confirms gun rampages are rising and armed civilians don't stop them. From a study by Texas State University shows that mass gun violence in America was on the rise. The trend appeared to be no coincidence in light of the proliferation of guns and looser gun laws. Public school shooting rampages have spiked in particular over the last few years. Many of the attackers were heavily armed. None of the shootings was stopped by an ordinary citizen using a gun. Studies from 2000 to 2012 have found that increased numbers of attacks have continued over those years, and there has been a record number of mass shootings, especially in the year 2012, shows a striking parallel that unprecedented spike in these shootings came during the 4-year period of 2009 to 2012 that saw a wave of nearly 100 state laws making it easier to obtain, carry, and conceal firearms. In other words, once again, we're going in absolutely the wrong distance. They found that a majority of mass shooters carried multiple weapons and that more than half of them used assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Moreover, their investigation made clear that so-called good guys with guns do not stop public shooting rampages. In 3 cases out of the 84 in which an armed individual had been on the scene and used a firearm to stop the shooter, none of those 3 people, out of 84 times, only 3 times was an armed individual there who stopped the shooting. 2 of those were off-duty cops, and one of them was a Marine. Once again, the wrong direction. The research studies it, the data shows it. Let's stop going in the wrong direction and maintain this limit on magazines.
Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Imagine a nation where high-capacity magazines were not available freely. I will concede, members, that our ban on the manufacture and purchase in Colorado of high-capacity magazines, with the grandfathering in of those high-capacity magazines that are already owned by Coloradans, that we enacted in 2013, is hard to enforce against someone who is determined to obtain one, or manufacture one, or buy one. Admittedly hard to enforce. And I admit also to the critics of this legislation that it is still possible, despite the ban, to import from a neighboring state a high-capacity magazine. But the fact remains that since 2014, when this law came into effect, that we passed in 2013, since then, it has been unlawful to manufacture a high-capacity magazine above 15 rounds in Colorado, or to buy one in Colorado, or to bring one into Colorado. And as that legislation takes root over many years, we will gradually but surely, if we stay the course, get to the stage where high-capacity magazines are not in our state. In very, very few, ever-decreasing numbers will they be here. And if we stay the course and we don't repeal this high-capacity magazine ban, if we stay the course, we will eventually reach the stage where other states are following our lead and sharing our view of this, that we would prefer to be in a world, in a nation, where high-capacity magazines are extremely hard to lay your hands on. It is not a matter of weeks or months, but it is a matter of time, which, if we stay the course, these high-capacity magazines will be gone. And as our critics say, it is true. We will lose, law-abiding people will lose the ability to easily obtain a high-capacity magazine to attach to their rifle. That is true. But when you think that in time we will get to the stage where high-capacity magazines are difficult for everyone to get, are we not willing to give up that ability to have a high-capacity magazine for our entertainment? I think we are. I think it is a sacrifice we are willing and should be willing to make. I concede to our critics. It would be nice to be able to get whatever we want, whenever we want it, with ease. But these things, if you do the cost-benefit analysis, we should be willing to surrender. Not the gun, not the right to fire a gun with a magazine, not the right to shoot a semi-automatic weapon, but just the ability to attach to it a magazine which has a capacity of 16 or more. That is something we should be willing to give up in order to get ever closer to the point when these high-capacity magazines are unavailable. You are right, members, those of you who say this law is hard to enforce, but it will not happen overnight. It will happen in time, but only if we stay the course. So I say, stay the course. We will reach a time when high-capacity magazines are hard to get for everybody if we stay the course. We must do that because it will be a safer world if we stay that course. I thank you.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, members, I urge a no vote on this bill. This is the 5th time I've been at the well talking about this bill. The year it passed and then 4 years since defending what we did in 2013. And I find it incredible that we are having this conversation after what happened in Parkland. My brother was a high school principal in that school district in Broward County Schools. Could have been him. My daughter went to University of Central Florida in Orlando, where the nightclub was, where that got shot up. All of us know how close to home this can be. And in fact, in Sandy Hook, yet this isn't a perfect thing to prevent gun violence, obviously not. But in some cases, it will help reduce damage, severe damage. That's what happened in Sandy Hook with some children when the shooter stopped to change out their round or the gun jammed. One of the two, they don't know. And there's a person who comes and lobbies this every year, and this is her sister. She said, right out there a week ago or so. She's a school counselor, was killed there defending children. And if you go through these pictures of these victims, they were all, the teachers and the teachers' assistants were helping defend children. But I got to tell you, what's most heart-wrenching about this, looking at these pictures, are these children. Daniel Barden, 7. Didn't have his front teeth. Olivia Engel, 6. I don't know what it takes to get through to folks on this, and that's why I'm bringing this up. Anybody watching, you can see. But they're pretty sure at least a half dozen, if not more, kids got away when this shooter slowed down, when they stopped changing the round. And closer to home, the Aurora the theater shooting, I tell you, you should look at these pictures and think about some kids that got saved because the magazine probably was being changed out. And that person had bigger, larger magazines than 15 rounds. 20 children, 6 adults there. But in Aurora, the shooter came in with a 100-round drum magazine. A few years ago, one of our members said, well, maybe it's a good idea because it jammed after, I think it was, they found 60-some rounds on the ground, spent shells on the ground. And I found it preposterous. I was in the room when it was said. And Tom Sullivan, who lost his son, said, I've thought a lot about what's happened to my son, but I've never thought a larger magazine was a good thing. But that person also brought in a handgun with 40 rounds. So when that AR-15 jammed, they went to the handgun. And that many rounds are, they're designed for war. That's simple. That's the first part. I mean, you look at weapons in World War II where they had 6 rounds and 15 rounds and that kind of thing. And they were getting bigger and bigger. And it was after Aurora and after Sandy Hook that we did this magazine limit and some other legislation that was needed. But if that's not enough to convince you that children at Sandy Hook or the fact that more people almost assuredly were killed in Aurora because of large magazines. It seems like a long time ago now, but we had law enforcement in here this morning. And in the Aurora shooting, the person had bought body armor, and the police speculated that was to take on other law enforcement. Do we really want large magazines when law enforcement is trying to stop somebody? Do we really want to put law enforcement in a defensive position that way? So it seems to me we should be listening to the students. They're exactly right. We need to do more to protect them, and part of that has to do with magazine limits. And if you won't do that for the Coloradans that were killed and maimed, people still recovering at the Aurora Theater or Columbine, or if you won't do it for the children in Sandy Hook that got away, 6, 7-year-olds, if you won't do it for law enforcement, to not have them at a disadvantage to protect you and I and the children, businesses, what will you do it for? This is a really bad idea to get rid of this magazine limit. It's not perfect, but it, in some cases, will save lives. In Sandy Hook, it very likely did.
Thank you.
So I ask you to vote no on this bill for the children, for Coloradans, and for law enforcement. We don't need to keep doing this every year. We had it right in 2013. And unfortunately, we're learning from these new tragedies we even more had it right. And why in the world would we be running a bill like this after another tragedy? Vote no.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A series of studies show that magazine limits do not reduce crime at all. This includes a study commissioned by the Department of Justice and the National Institute of Justice. And also, they have found the theory that pausing to reload has proven to be a myth. We have study after study after study from the Center for Disease Control in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Justice and others, that when they compile their evidence and their numbers, it's a far better, reliable source of information than anything that we can get from CNN or others who compile pretty incomplete data, but they consider it very factual and true. The National Safety Council notes that guns are used in some 2.5 million self-defense incidents against criminals, meaning that firearms are utilized to protect innocent lives in 80 times more cases than they are used to end lives. That's pretty amazing when you look at the positive side of gun ownership and how we use them. They also found that gun control actually increases violent crime. And we can look at that because in 2013, we did pass those gun laws. And what happened? Since then, in Denver, we have a 9% increase in homicide. So you tell me, what stats do you want to listen to? And what are you going to look at right here in our own yard, Denver? I've got stacks and stacks of information on firearms and things that happen around the world and how violence is now equated, even in Great Britain, where the weapon of choice is knives. In the UK, you are more than twice as likely to be a victim of knife crime than you are a victim of gun crime in the United States. But there's no media debate about banning kitchen knives. And despite a widespread ban on gun ownership in the United Kingdom, it is the most dangerous place to live in terms of violent crime in the Western world. Think about that.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The hour is late. I hope we conclude this debate quickly, but I've listened to so many arguments that I don't believe are correct. And I wanted to come down and clear the record on a couple of points. One is, well, before really stating that, I want to tell you that all of us can give a personal story on their connection with some shooting here in Colorado or elsewhere. Just a couple of weeks ago, I talked to a dear friend of mine who was a dad of a couple of students at that school in Parkland. That's a serious issue. And that's why I'm supporting this bill, because the limitation on the size of a magazine only applies to the law-abiding citizen. You know, I heard a discussion a little bit earlier here about common characteristics from different mass shootings. And the one common point to all mass shootings is there was a murderous, I'll call it fiend, who couldn't care less what was legal or not legal. And if we think that limitation on a magazine size is going to change that scenario, I believe we're kidding ourselves. Now, the argument was made, well, eventually it'll correct itself as it just there become fewer and fewer of these magazines around, and yet the sponsor of the bill pointed out, even as I did back when we had this original debate on this original law, that you can make one of these plastic boxes any size you want with a 3D printer. You can't convince me that somehow our putting this or keeping this law in place is actually going to keep this out of the hands of the bad guys. It is not so at all. I'm concerned that we don't allow the honest citizen to defend themselves. And this is just one more step. This is an ineffectual one, too, completely unenforceable, with a lot of unintended consequence. Some weapons don't even have magazines that are below the limitation, and therefore the weapon itself is rendered inoperable if you don't have access to the magazine. So it's more than just a magazine ban, but it's taking these tools of defense out of the hands of the good guy. That's why I very proudly stand up here and say I support this legislation. It is the right choice. It, in fact, does address the crisis that is before us, and it does it in a way that works. Please vote yes.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 52? Seeing none, the motion, Senator Hill.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, just want to say in all seriousness, thanks very much for the good debate. I think it's an important debate, and I appreciate the conversation tonight. So, thank you.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 52? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption. Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 2 words. Enough. 3 words. Enough is enough.
Any further discussion on Senate Bill 52? Now seeing none, the motion for the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 52. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 52 passes. Assistant Majority Leader Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we move the balance of the calendar to the end of the second reading calendar for March 29th.
Motion for the body is to move is to lay over the balance of the calendar until the end of the calendar on second reading tomorrow. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The balance of the calendar will lay over to the end of the calendar tomorrow. Assistant Majority Leader Scott.
I move that we rise and report.
Motion for the body is to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. We shall rise and report.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Senate will come back to order. Senator Hill.
Mr. President, your committee has met and had a number of bills under consideration. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee hold begs lead reports that under consideration the following tax bills being the second reading thereof makes the following recommendations thereon. Senate Bill 197 is amended. Senate Bill 123 is amended. Senate Bill 192, Senate Bill 185, Senate Bill 52 passed second read order and grows placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1148, House Bill 1018 as amended. House Bill 1242 is amended. House Bill 1199. House Bill 1246, House Bill 1134, House Bill 1254 is amended. House Bill 1098 passed in second read order, revised, placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 166 laid over to the end of the general order's second reading of the bill's calendar of 3/29/18.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. Four, 13.
Senator Hill.
Mr. President, I move the report.
Motion before the body is the adoption of the report to the Committee of the Whole. There is an amendment on the desk. Mr. Carpenter, would you please read amendment number 1, Senator Garcia's amendment number 1.
Committee of the Whole Amendment 002 to Senate Bill 123. Senator Garcia moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to show that the following...
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, I'd ask for an aye vote on committee amendment. I move committee amendment LW. I think we have a wrong sequence, 001.
We are, just for everybody's note, we're just putting this is amendment number 1. It is actually technically Committee of the Whole Amendment 2 to Senate Bill 123. Senator Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the committee amendment number 1.
That'll suffice. We know which one it is. Senator Garcia.
Or the Garcia Amendment. Thank you,
There
Mr.
you go.
President.
Exactly.
The Garcia Amendment to the Committee of the Whole. Members, I would ask for an aye vote on this, and the reason why this is important is because I'm asking that we reverse the action that was taken, because as you might remember, the amendment that was taken out had the specific language that said any natural person who may be facing a premature death from exposure to asbestos that occurred while he or she was a member of the armed forces. As I shared earlier, I am aware that the United Veterans Council is neutral on this, but there are a number of provisions of American Legion, VFW, which is Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the Purple Heart Association who are opposed to the bill. I know there are some groups that are neutral, but I would say as a veteran who served in Iraq in 2003 and knowing how our veterans struggle with mesothelioma, that I would ask for an aye vote on the Garcia Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just feel the need to defend myself and what I feel is a coming onslaught on my ability to count and to hear, and the chair. So I just want to defend. I think I could count and hear pretty well.
Is that a motion? Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief. It's been a long day. I read you the letter from Senator Sonny Borrelli, who retired after 22 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, active veteran advocate, a legislator who has served in Arizona. He watches out for their best interests. He was instrumental in passing the same legislation down there. I won't read the list of all the military or veteran organizations that support the bill. What I will tell you is this bill is about speeding up the litigation, speeding up the opportunity to actually get compensation, and not following what the New York Times says is the bonanza for the trial lawyers. You have two options. You can vote for the amendment and support the trial lawyers and take the veterans out, or you can vote for veterans and leave them in the bill so they have access to this quick access to the money that's involved and set aside for those affected.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Garcia Amendment number 1. Are there any no votes? Majority Leader Holbert, Senator John, Senator Scott, Senator Priola, Senator Smallwood, Senator Lambert, Senator Lundberg, Senator Gardner, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Coram, Senator Cook, Senator Hill, Senator Crowder, Senator Marble, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Neville, Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Tate. Please add the President. With 16 ayes, 19 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1 is lost. Mr. Carpenter, would you please read Committee of the Whole Amendment number 2 by Senator Donovan?
Committee of the Whole Amendment 001, Senate Bill 192. Senator Donovan moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to show that the following Donovan Floor Amendment L002 to Senate Bill 192 did pass. Amend printed bill page 2, line 5 after moratorium. Insert 1, page 2
Senator
after line.
Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Committee of the Whole number 1 to Senate Bill 192.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This Committee of the Whole shows that the amendment that we debated during the 192 bill did indeed pass, and I ask for your aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Committee of the Whole Amendment 2? Senator Marble, would you like to say something?
Thank you. I ask for a no vote on the amendment.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Committee of the Whole Amendment 2. Are there any no votes? The Donovan Amendment. Senator Scott, Senator Priola, Senator Smallwood, Senator Tate, Senator Lambert, Senator Lundberg, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Gardner, Senator Coram, and Senator Coram, Senator Neville, Senator Marble, Senator Cook, Senator John, Senator Hill, Senator Crowder, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Sonnenberg, Majority Leader Holbert. Please add the president. (16 ayes, 19 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused). Committee of the Whole Amendment 1 to Senate Bill 192 is lost. Mr. Carpenter, would you please read Fenberg Amendment number 3?
Committee to the Whole Amendment 002 to Senate Bill 192. Senator Fenberg moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to show that the following Fenberg Floor Amendment L001 to Senate Bill 192 did pass. Amend printed bill page 2, line 5 after moratorium. Insert 1, page 2 after line 20.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move cow number 3 to the report.
To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment basically says that the amendment L001 to Senate Bill 192 did pass and shows that we as a body appreciate and respect the will of the voters all across this state.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Marble?
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for a no vote on Cal 002.
The Fenberg Amendment.
Oh, number 3. It says 2, but it's 3.
Yes.
My apologies.
Senator Coram?
Thank you, Mr. President. Isn't there an age limit that you can run a cow?
Are you over that limit, Senator Coram? Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of amendment number 3. Are there any no votes? Senator John, Senator Marble, Senator Cook, Senator Crowder, Senator Coram, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Lundberg, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Gardner, Senator Neville, Senator Hill, Majority Leader Holbert, Senator Priola, Senator Smallwood, Senator Tate, Senator Lambert, Senator Scott. Please add the president. With 16 ayes, 19 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Committee of the Whole Amendment 3 is lost. Mr. Carpenter, would you please read Amendment 4 by Senator Kerr?
Committee of the Whole Amendment 001, Senate Bill 185, Senator Kerr moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole, which showed the following Kerr floor amendment L005 to Senate Bill 185 did pass. Amendment printed Bill Pitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Committee of the Whole Amendment 4
To the amendment.
to Senate Bill 185. Thank you, Mr. President. I have a wonderful article that gives a historical background on a different amendment that doesn't fit under this amendment. So, and I think I gave the the article to the senator from Fort Collins. So, and he can't find it at the moment. So, I will not be reading that wonderful historical article.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
With Senate Bill 185, if Senate Bill 185 is to pass, and I have to admit I hope that it doesn't, but if Senate Bill 185 is to pass, I do hope that we put in some guardrails and protections for the people of Colorado. And what this amendment specifically does is it makes sure that if there is illegal activity, an illegal business happening, or the weapon in question about relieving the liability of being used in this activity, that deadly weapon was obtained illegally, that does not allow the immunity to happen. The piece around the illegal activity, and I know that in the language of the bill it talks about the place of business and legal activity happening, but I think we can all visualize that in any place of business with legal activity happening, something happening up front. Think of a restaurant where people are coming and going, and everything is by the book. But what's happening in the back? What's happening in the rear of the business? And if there's illegal activity, and this talks about prostitution, illegal gambling, illegal drugs, illegal weapons being manufactured, a chop shop. If any of those activities are happening on the premises, that this immunity is not automatically granted and just allows the court to have a little bit more oversight, a little bit more say. Because who knows why someone might be going to what otherwise seems to be a perfectly legal business place, but if there's something illegal happening there, and of course then the section here about an illegally obtained deadly weapon, if that weapon is to be used, we want to make sure that there is no statute covering somebody who is using an illegally obtained deadly weapon. And with that, I ask that we please vote aye on Cow 4 to Senate Bill 185.
Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge a no vote on Cow 001.
All amendments currently on the table. How about that?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment 4. Are there any no votes? Majority Leader Holbert, Senator Scott, Senator Priola, Senator Smallwood, Senator Tate, Senator Lambert, Senator Lundberg, Senator Martinez-Humenick, Senator Gardner, Senator Corum, Senator Neville, Senator Marble, Senator John, Senator Hill, Senator Crowder, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Sonnenberg, Senator Cook, please add the president. 16 ayes, 19 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused. Committee of the Whole Amendment 4 is lost. Motion before the body is the adoption of the report to the Committee of the Whole. Are there any no votes? 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused. Committee of the Whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 197 is amended. Senate Bill 123 is amended. Senate Bill 192, Senate Bill 185, Senate Bill 52 passed on second reading, ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1148, House Bill 1018 is amended. House Bill 1242 is amended. House Bill 1199, House Bill 1246, House Bill 1134, House Bill 1254 is amended. House Bill 1098 passed on second reading, order revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 166 laid over to the end of the general order's second reading of bills calendar of 3/29/18. Announcements. Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've had so much fun tonight that colleagues, Finance, we have two bills tomorrow on adjournment that we'll be hearing. Senate Bill 210 and Senate Bill 199 tomorrow on adjournment in Finance.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I have a moment of personal privilege?
Granted.
So members, I will not make this moment last until 10:15, which is the time I had, I think, down on my bet. But in a more serious manner, you know, the senator from Northeastern Colorado really offended me earlier today when he implied that there was something going on in this chamber of which, you know, he just couldn't understand why we were so terse with each other. And for any of you who haven't seen it, I'm happy to give you a copy of the bill paper resolution we turned in on February 13th, asking for the expulsion of the senator from Northwestern Colorado. And you may remember that every single day we have stood up here when we've been here in the Senate and asked that this resolution be introduced and read across the table and have been completely ignored. And so if you want to know why there's tension in this chamber, it's because our calls go ignored. For this reason, we, the members of the Senate Democratic Caucus, ask that the Senate resolution we prepared and submitted for introduction on February 13th, entitled Concerning the Expulsion of the Senator from Northwestern Colorado for Sexual Harassment of a Legislative Employee, be promptly introduced and brought to the floor of the Senate for debate. And members, this is my 8th year in the legislature, and I have never been ignored when I've raised my hand at the front of the chamber, and that only adds to the tension in this chamber. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Senator Lambert.
Joint Budget Committee will not meet upon adjournment.
Majority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adjourn until 9 a.m. Thursday, March 29th.
Colleagues, I am open to discussions as far as when I should hit this gavel. You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. And we will be adjourned until 9 a.m. Thursday, March 29th, 2018, in the year of our Lord, 2018, Anno Domini in the Common Era.